Morocco is a country most people think they already know. They picture the blue streets of Chefchaouen, the crowded souks of Marrakech, camel caravans crossing golden dunes beneath an endless sky. But these images tell only half the story. Because beyond the places tourists come to see, there is another Morocco. A Morocco hidden in the mountains, where ancient villages cling to the slopes of the Atlas. A Morocco where craftsmen still shape leather, metal, wood, and clay using techniques passed down through generations. A Morocco where the desert was never empty, but once carried caravans, gold, salt, ideas, and entire civilizations across Africa. And then, just a few hours away, modern cities rise into the sky, filled with highways, technology, skyscrapers, and a generation looking toward the future. Here, the ancient and the modern do not exist in separate worlds. They collide. They overlap. And somehow, they survive together. Because Morocco is more than a destination between Europe and Africa. It is a kingdom caught between two worlds. And perhaps the most fascinating part of it is the world most people never see. Part 1, The Morocco Beyond the Postcard. Morocco is often introduced through its most beautiful images. A narrow street painted blue. A crowded market beneath colorful lanterns. The walls of an ancient medina glowing beneath the afternoon sun. But the real Morocco begins when you stop looking at it as a postcard. Because behind the famous cities and monuments is a country shaped by people whose lives have little to do with tourism. In the early morning, before the markets become crowded, Morocco is already awake. In small neighborhoods, shopkeepers lift metal shutters. Bakers pull fresh bread from traditional ovens. Donkeys move through narrow streets where cars cannot enter. Somewhere nearby, an old craftsman sits behind a workbench, repeating movements his hands learned decades ago. There is nothing spectacular about the scene. And that is exactly what makes it important. Because Morocco's history is not preserved only inside palaces or museums. It is still being lived. For centuries, this land has been a meeting point between different worlds. The indigenous Amazigh peoples have lived across North Africa for thousands of years. Arab influence arrived centuries later, bringing new languages, traditions, and religious institutions. African trade routes connected the interior to the Sahara and beyond. And across the Mediterranean, Europe remained close enough to influence Morocco's cities, economy, architecture, and politics. These influences did not simply replace one another. They became intertwined. You can see it in the language spoken in a marketplace. In the architecture of a traditional house. In the patterns woven into a carpet. In the food prepared in a family kitchen. And perhaps most clearly, in the people themselves. Morocco does not have one single story. It has layers. And some of those layers are disappearing faster than we realize. In the cities, modern life is moving quickly. Young Moroccans study at universities, work with technology, build businesses, travel abroad, and communicate with the rest of the world instantly. But only a few hours away, the rhythm of life can be completely different. There are villages where the mountains still determine when people travel, what they grow, and how they build their homes. There are families who continue crafts their ancestors practiced long before modern factories existed. And there are old traditions that survive not because someone decided to preserve them, but simply because people never stopped living them. This is what makes Morocco so difficult to define. It is modern, but deeply connected to its past. It is African, Arab, Amazigh, Mediterranean, and unmistakably its own. And perhaps nowhere is this complexity more visible than beyond the cities. Because as the roads begin climbing toward the Atlas Mountains, the Morocco of tourist photographs slowly disappears. The buildings become smaller. The landscape becomes harsher. The roads begin to twist through valleys and cliffs. And villages appear where you might least expect them. Up there, among the mountains, another chapter of Morocco is waiting. One where the landscape itself has helped protect a way of life for generations. Part 2, where the mountains keep their secrets. The Atlas Mountains rise across Morocco like a vast natural wall. From a distance, they can look almost empty, endless ridges of stone, deep valleys, and snow-covered peaks disappearing into the clouds. But hidden within these mountains are communities that have adapted to this difficult landscape for generations. Here, the road becomes narrower. The cities feel increasingly distant. And the rhythm of life begins to change. In the valleys, villages are built directly into the landscape. Homes made from earth and stone blend into the mountainsides, sometimes appearing almost indistinguishable from the surrounding cliffs. Terraces climb the slopes. Small fields follow the contours of the land. Water from mountain streams becomes something precious, carefully shared between communities. For the people who live here, the mountains are not simply scenery. They are part of everyday life. They determine where people can build, where crops can grow, how far a family must travel for water, markets, or school. And for centuries, these mountains also provided something less visible: distance. While empires rose and fell across North Africa, remote mountain communities were often able to preserve languages, customs, crafts, and traditions that might otherwise have disappeared. Much of this heritage belongs to the Amazigh peoples, communities whose history in North Africa stretches back long before the arrival of the Arab conquests. Their presence can still be seen in the architecture, clothing, music, symbols, and languages of the mountains. But perhaps the most powerful way to understand this heritage is through the hands of the people who still practice it. A woman sits at a loom. Thread by thread, she creates patterns that carry meanings understood within her community. Beside her, an older generation watches. The technique is not written in a manual. It is remembered. It is demonstrated. It is repeated. And then, if the next generation chooses to learn it, it continues. But that choice is becoming more complicated. For a young person growing up in an isolated mountain village, the modern world is no longer distant. A smartphone can connect them to a city thousands of kilometers away in seconds. A paved road can transform a journey that once took hours into something much faster. Education and employment increasingly pull young people toward Morocco's growing cities. And this creates a quiet tension. The mountains can preserve a way of life. But they can also make that life difficult. Healthcare may be far away. Jobs can be limited. Winter can isolate entire communities. For some young Moroccans, leaving the mountains is not about rejecting their heritage. It is simply about searching for opportunities their grandparents never had. And yet, even when people leave, the mountains often remain part of who they are. Their language, their food, their music, their memories, their family traditions. This is the hidden side of Morocco that is easy to miss from the tourist routes. Because the country's ancient identity is not locked inside monuments. It lives in ordinary people. In villages. In family homes. In the knowledge passed quietly from one generation to the next. And as we continue south, the mountains begin to open. The green valleys become drier. The air grows hotter. The landscape changes from stone to dust. Ahead lies one of the most misunderstood landscapes on Earth. The Sahara. For centuries, people imagined the desert as a place where nothing could survive. But Morocco's desert tells a very different story. Because these sands were never simply the end of the road. They were the beginning of one. Part 3, The Desert That Built a Kingdom. The Sahara is often filmed as a place of silence. Endless dunes. Golden light. A lone camel moving across the horizon. It is beautiful. But it hides something important. The desert was never empty. For centuries, it was one of the great highways of Africa. Long before modern roads crossed Morocco, caravans moved through this enormous landscape, linking North Africa with communities deep in the continent. And they carried something far more valuable than souvenirs. They carried gold, salt, leather, Textiles. Spices. Knowledge. Ideas. And people. A caravan could spend weeks crossing landscapes where water was more valuable than almost anything else. The routes were dangerous. But they connected worlds that would otherwise have remained separated by thousands of kilometers of desert. And Morocco stood at the northern end of some of these routes. This helped transform settlements in the south into centers of trade and power. One of the clearest reminders of that world can still be seen in Morocco's ancient kasbahs. Built from earth and clay, their walls seem to rise directly from the landscape. From a distance, they almost disappear into the desert. But inside, they were designed around a simple understanding of survival. Thick walls kept interiors cooler. Narrow openings limited the harsh sunlight. Courtyards created shade. And settlements were positioned around one of the desert's most precious resources: water. In places like the Dra Valley, palm groves emerge from the dry landscape almost like an illusion. Date palms rise above fields. Small communities gather around oases. And beneath the surface, ancient systems of water management made life possible. The desert demanded cooperation. You could not survive alone. Water had to be managed. Routes had to be known. And travelers needed places where they could rest, trade, and replenish their supplies. That is how the desert became connected. Not by roads, but by knowledge. A guide who knew where water could be found. A merchant who knew which route was safe. A community that understood the seasons. A caravan leader who could read the landscape. For generations, this knowledge moved from one person to another. And it helped create a world in which Morocco was connected not only to the Mediterranean, but to the vast interior of Africa. The wealth moving along these routes helped build cities, support rulers, and strengthen kingdoms. The desert was not separating Morocco from Africa. It was connecting them. But eventually, the old caravan world began to disappear. Modern transportation changed everything. New borders divided territories that caravans had once crossed. Roads replaced ancient trails. Ships and railways transformed long-distance trade. And eventually, airplanes made journeys that once took months possible in a matter of hours. The great caravans became a memory. Yet their legacy remains written across southern Morocco. In the kasbahs. In the oases. In the old roads disappearing into the horizon. And in towns that once depended on travelers crossing the desert. Stand in the Sahara today, and the silence can make it feel as though nothing ever happened here. But beneath that silence is a different story. A story of movement. Commerce. Conflict. And cultural exchange. The desert helped shape Morocco because people learned how to cross it. And once those people reached the cities, they brought the world with them. That world eventually gathered behind walls of stone and earth. In places where narrow streets still follow the same paths they did centuries ago. Places where craftsmen continue to work with their hands. Places where the past is not simply remembered, but lived. And nowhere is that more powerful than in Morocco's ancient cities. Part 4, the cities that never really left the past. If the desert connected Morocco to the wider world, its ancient cities became the places where those worlds met. Behind massive gates and weathered walls, another Morocco begins. The streets become narrower. The sounds become louder. A hammer strikes metal. A door opens. A merchant calls to a customer. Donkeys move through the crowds. And somewhere in the middle of it all, an artisan continues working exactly as generations before him did. This is the Medina. But to understand Morocco's ancient cities, you have to stop thinking of them as monuments. They are not museums. People still live here. They work here. They raise families here. They argue, trade, pray, eat, and grow old here. In Fez, the ancient Medina stretches through a maze of streets so complex that a first-time visitor can become lost within minutes. There are no wide modern avenues cutting through the historic center. Instead, the city unfolds gradually. A small doorway can lead into a workshop. A dark passage can suddenly open into a busy square. And behind an unremarkable wall, craftsmen may be practicing skills that have survived for centuries. Leatherworkers, metalworkers, woodcarvers, tile makers, weavers. Each craft has its own rhythm. A piece of leather is cut. A hammer strikes. A pattern is repeated. A tile is shaped. Another piece is placed beside it. The work can look simple from a distance. But mastery comes from repetition. Years become decades. And the knowledge of one generation becomes the starting point for the next. This is one of Morocco's most remarkable forms of history. Not history written in books. History written in human hands. A young apprentice watches an older craftsman. At first, he copies. Then he makes mistakes. Then he tries again. Eventually, the movements become instinctive. And something that existed before him continues because of him. But the ancient cities are facing a difficult question. What happens when the world around them changes faster than the traditions inside them? Factories can produce objects faster. Machines can make them cheaper. Tourism creates demand, but it can also turn traditional culture into something designed primarily for visitors. And young people have opportunities their grandparents could never have imagined. So preserving the past is not always simple. Sometimes the greatest threat to an old tradition is not destruction. It is irrelevance. Yet these cities continue to adapt. And nowhere is that transformation more visible than beyond the walls. Leave the narrow streets of Fez or Marrakech, and the landscape changes almost immediately. Glass. Concrete. Highways. Shopping centers. Modern neighborhoods. And then there is Casablanca. A city that looks toward the future. Morocco's economic heart is a completely different world from the ancient medinas. Cars move through broad streets. Buildings rise above the city. Businesses connect Morocco to Europe, Africa, and the global economy. Young people move between languages, cultures, and technologies with a speed unimaginable to previous generations. A smartphone can connect a teenager in Casablanca to almost anywhere on Earth. But a few hours away, an artisan may still be using tools that have changed very little in generations. That contrast is not an accident. It is Morocco itself. The country has never been a single frozen image. It has always been changing. Kingdoms rose and fell. Trade routes shifted. Languages evolved. Cities expanded. Foreign influences arrived. And Morocco absorbed them without completely abandoning what came before. That may be why its ancient cities feel so different from ruins elsewhere. They do not feel silent. They feel alive. The walls may be centuries old. But the voices behind them belong to the present. And perhaps that is the greatest challenge of all. Because Morocco now stands at a crossroads. Its cities are modernizing. Its young population is looking forward. Its economy is becoming increasingly connected to the world. But its identity is still deeply rooted in landscapes, languages, crafts, and traditions that took centuries to develop. So the question is no longer whether Morocco can preserve the past. The real question is whether it can carry that past into the future. Without allowing it to become a museum piece. Because this is where the two Moroccos finally meet. The ancient kingdom of narrow streets and handmade traditions. And the modern nation of highways, technology, and global cities. And between them stands a new generation, deciding what should be carried forward. And what should finally be left behind. Part 5, The Kingdom Between Two Worlds. Perhaps the easiest way to understand Morocco is to stop asking which world it belongs to. Is it African? Arab? Amazigh? Mediterranean? Modern? Traditional? The answer is not one of them. It is all of them. Morocco has spent centuries absorbing influences from different directions without becoming completely defined by any single one. And that history is visible everywhere. In the mountains, Amazigh languages and traditions continue to shape everyday life. In the ancient cities, Arab and Islamic architecture stands beside centuries-old crafts. Across the south, the memory of trans-Saharan trade remains written into kasbahs, oases, and desert routes. And on the Atlantic coast, modern Morocco looks outward toward Europe and the wider world. These are not separate Moroccos. They are layers of the same country. But now, perhaps for the first time, those layers are changing at extraordinary speed. A young Moroccan can grow up surrounded by traditions that are centuries old, while living inside a world connected instantly to everything beyond Morocco's borders. They can learn an ancestral craft from a grandparent in the morning and study technology online that same evening. They can live between languages, between generations, between the expectations of family and the possibilities of the modern world. And this creates a question that Morocco cannot avoid. What happens when the future arrives faster than the past can adapt? Some traditions will disappear. Some crafts may become too expensive or too slow to compete with mass production. Some remote communities will continue losing young people to the cities. And some old neighborhoods may change as modernization and tourism reshape the spaces that once existed for local communities. But disappearance is not the only possible future. Across Morocco, people are finding new ways to keep old traditions alive. A craft can become a profession. A traditional design can inspire modern architecture. An ancient recipe can survive in a contemporary kitchen. A language once spoken mainly at home can find new generations of speakers. The past does not always survive by remaining unchanged. Sometimes it survives by evolving. And perhaps that is the secret behind Morocco's remarkable resilience. For centuries, this country has existed between worlds. Between the Mediterranean and Africa. Between mountains and desert. Between ancient trade routes and modern highways. Between inherited traditions and new possibilities. Morocco has never been completely isolated from change. It has simply learned how to absorb it. That is why the most fascinating Morocco is not necessarily the one found in the famous photographs. It is the Morocco found in the spaces between them. The mountain village where an old language is still spoken. The workshop where a craftsman's hands repeat movements learned from his father. The desert road following a route once used by caravans. The ancient Medina where centuries-old walls surround people living completely modern lives. And the young person standing in the middle of all of it, trying to decide what the future should look like. Because countries are not preserved by their monuments alone. They survive through people. Through memory. Through choices. And Morocco is now making those choices in real time. Perhaps one day some of the places we have seen will change beyond recognition. Perhaps some traditions will disappear. Perhaps others will become stronger precisely because a new generation decides they are worth saving. We cannot know. But that uncertainty is part of what makes Morocco so compelling. Because this is not a country trapped between its past and its future. It is a country negotiating between them. And maybe that is what "between two worlds" really means. Not choosing one side. But carrying both forward. From the first light over the Atlas Mountains. To the last glow disappearing across the Sahara. From ancient medinas to modern skylines. Morocco tells a story that cannot be reduced to a single image. The Morocco most people see is beautiful. But the Morocco beneath it is something more complicated. More human. And far more fascinating. Because behind the walls, beyond the tourist routes, and underneath the postcard, the old kingdom is still alive. And it is changing before our eyes.